snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books.
Hey guys, I am here today to do a book review, and the book that I'm going to be reviewing is the third one in the Burton and Swinburne series by Mark Hodder. This is The Expedition to the Mountains of the Moon, and this is a very classically British, with a lot of dry British humour, steampunk series. I started this series a while back, and the first one in the series is called The Strange Affair of Spring Hill Jack, so I'll put a link to my review of that in the top if you want to go check that out. But as always, this will be non-spoiler. I have to say that this series never ceases to keep me entertained. I actually read the majority of this book throughout the Tome Topple Readathon, which was hosted by Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. I'll link her channel, and this is over 500 pages, which is why it counted. It's about 600 and something. This is just bonkers. This whole series is just bonkers, but in a really great way. It's very British, it's very funny, it's very witty, it's very dry, and it has a lot of great moments that really keep me on my toes and keep me engaged with the whole story. So it's certainly a series I would recommend. I will say this is not my favourite one in the series. I do think that the first one still remains my favourite, but in terms of just a great continuation to the series, I would say that this and the second one are still great continuations of the series and do make me want to carry on with it. I think one of the reasons that this wasn't my favourite in the series is probably because I actually started this one a long time ago, probably a good 3-4 months ago. I don't even know, it might be more than that, and I started reading it and I got about 30 or 40 pages in, and that was very soon after I finished the second book, so it was quite fresh in my head and I was enjoying it, but I had to put it down because there was another book that I needed to read for review. So I then went back to this quite a long time after that start point, and I carried on from where I'd left off, and I don't think everything was as fresh in my mind as it could have been had I continued when I first started it, so it did take me a little bit longer to sort of re-immerse myself in the world and get reinvested in the characters. Once that had happened, it was also quite interesting because this book takes a different approach to the previous two. In the previous two, we are following Sir Burton and Swinburne as they adventure around, kind of doing all sorts of crazy tasks, dealing with strange inventions, weird characters who are basically a threat to Britain. In this book, we are following those two characters again, but we actually have two storylines on the go. One is in the future and one is in the present, and it's quite hard at first to kind of adjust to that, I think, because you're kind of just thrown into it and there's not a huge amount of explanation, although you do know some of it. It's not all explained until a lot later in the book. So these two separate storylines did throw me off a little. With that said, it gives a very interesting setup to the book because we have the same character in two different storylines and we're seeing them as they go through two different adventures, both of which could hugely affect the fate of this world if either one goes wrong. So that's always pretty interesting to see. One of the things I found most interesting about this book in particular is that it has a kind of darker focus. There's quite a distinct shift from light and fun adventures, which are the first two books, to a much heavier topic in this. We actually have an entire storyline that is focused on war, quite a big, dramatic, horrible war as well, and that really was quite hard-hitting at times. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of sadness, and the world itself, and particularly the British country which we are focused on, is not great at this time. We're sort of following them in a very bleak time period and hoping that our main character can somehow pull them out of it. The other timeline that we're focused on actually focuses on African tribes, and I think that was a pretty interesting focus because it's a much lighter focus and it kind of juxtaposes with that wartime focus. However, there are similarities between the two, and if you take a deeper look, you can see that the tribal culture and the African culture is kind of being suppressed at times by British influence and British invaders, and obviously that's quite true to our heritage, what Britain did actually go and do, so it's kind of uncomfortable at times to read about that. At the end of the day, this is a fiction book, and it is a romp, and it's an adventure, and that is kind of the moral of this whole story, really. Like, there are some dark, deep topics that you encounter, but it's still a wacky, still quite light-hearted, funny series throughout the majority of this book. I will say that of the two storylines, the war one and the African one, I would say the African one was far more interesting to me, just because I don't necessarily know an awful lot about Africa. I've never been, and finding out a bit more about the tribal culture there and some of the places that these people visited was all interesting, and I know that Mark Hodder definitely does his research, and that comes across in these books quite well, so I enjoyed that a lot. I will not say that he is the best African researcher out there or anything like that, but he's done some research into it and that does come across, so that's always good. I also really enjoyed the way that he got the characters to interact. So our main character Burton is kind of the spokesperson for the British when liaising with the Africans in this, and I liked that a lot because Burton is quite a character himself. One of the things that makes this series quite interesting is it does use real historical figures like Swinburne and Burton, but they are completely fictionalized, and so what they do in these books is obviously made up, obviously not really a reflection of their characters, but it does make it an interesting thing to consider. What if this had happened? What if we lived in a crazy steampunk world where there were big insectoid machines tramping through Africa trying to escape? Definitely something that I found quite peculiar, found quite exciting, and would certainly say is batty. That's probably the best way to describe the series. Quite batty, quite unusual, but filled with life and promise and excitement. On the whole, as I said, I think this is a solid continuation for the series. I do think this is a series I will continue with. I already have book 4 and 5 waiting for me. I think there are 6 in the series in total, so I'm halfway through. Hopefully next time I sit down to read one of these, I'll be able to just plough through the entire book in one go, because that would be great, and I will probably keep it fresher in my mind. So do let me know if you guys have read any of the Burton and Swinburne books, or indeed any other of Mark Hodder's books, because this is the only series by him I've read so far, but his other series does intrigue me. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in my next review. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.